Okay, in this episode of Throttle Stop Garage, we're going to take a little bit of square tube and some ingenuity, and I'm going to show you how to make an adjuster for an English wheel. At some point in your car project, you have to get on and get the sheet metal work done. Or maybe you're just interested in learning the craft of metal shaping. Either way, one of the primary tools used to shape metal is an English wheel. Now, English wheels come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, from little ones to giant ones to things that definitely won't fit in your garage. And they come at different price points too, inexpensive through to prohibitively expensive. And I'm just learning. I've never wheeled sheet metal ever before in my life, but I'm going to start just by building my own wheel. It's not going to be massive. I don't work in a big space. I have a small garage. So I had a couple of options. I could go down to the Harbor Freight or the Princess Auto and I could buy an inexpensive wheel. I hear they're not all that bad, but I've read on lots of forums that if I build a better quality tool, I may have an easier time learning. I have no idea, but I know the first step is I have to keep this inexpensive and I have to keep it accessible. I don't own a lathe. I don't have a mill. What I have is a welder and a drill press, and I own a grinder. So we're going to see if we can get the first step done, which is just building the adjuster. Right from the beginning, you know we're going to have to make some sparks. We've got to get some material cut. There's no other way to do these things. I prefer to use my plasma cutter for this stuff. I do not enjoy using the wheel of death ever. There are ways to use those that make them reasonably safe, but plasma sure does make quick work. All I'm doing here is just making some end plates for the tubes that I need in order to make mounts and other bits and pieces and parts that I have. Now, I've been playing around with a couple of designs, and I didn't really like anything that I'd seen. So I just kind of went back to first principles and decided to just begin making this setup exactly the way I think it should go. So it should be simple, it should be inexpensive to make, and it should be reasonably easy to fabricate. I'm going to show you every single detail as we go by. Most of it didn't involve any super fancy or expensive tools to get done. That's just my compressor in the background. Boy, that's noisy. I'm going to turn that down. All right, enjoy the cutting. All right, now that the cutting's all done, just going to take those rough edges and sand them out just using the little finger sander there. A little bit easier to do that initially with that tool than grab the file and make sure everything is square and reasonably straight. Then, hey, one thing fits inside the other. That works great. Now, I don't have a lathe, so I have no way to bore a nice perfect circle. So I go down to the farm supply store and I buy sprockets. I've done this for years. They're super cheap. They're flat. They're machined flat, for heaven's sake. You can cut them. I bought a W hub to go on this, and it works just perfectly. So that plasma cutter comes again, and we're going to get it all done up here in just a sec. We'll turn that into a nice square to fit on the top, and then all we have to do is screw in the corners. Piece of cake, right? Don't let the fact that you don't have the right tool all the time get in your way. The right tool is whatever tool you happen to have in your hand. Okay, squaring it up roughly with the grinder. Again, you want to be getting that plasma flash off of there because it's quite hard to get through, so the grinder is pretty effective. And at no point did all that material ever hit the floor. I did clean it up, though. Always, always, always. Some habits they just die a slow and painful death. Now, I didn't get any footage of me just welding the corners of the tube. I thought it would be epically boring just to show me doing a little weld buildup into the corner. I need some places there to make some threaded holes. So I just simply grabbed my MIG and just glued a bunch of weld into the corners of these things. It'll be just fine. And then because I need these holes to be accurate, like everything has to fit nicely, I actually am using a center drill there. So instead of just using a regular drill, I use a center drill because it's stubby and it's stiff and it doesn't bend, doesn't deflect. It's doing a real nice job. I did every single hole first with a center drill and then went back and got the right, drill size if I'm tapping it, or clearance hole if I'm making a clearance hole for all of these things. So just spend a half a day just popping holes in things and making sure we're going to be able to attach those plates nicely. Would you look at that? First test fit in and they all four go in the right spot. Got to be happy with that. It was the same for the others. Then it's lopped the corners off to make it nice and neat. All right, so we're obviously making a square adjuster here. I have no idea how I'd make a round adjuster. I wouldn't even care. And everyone that's selling those round adjusters, boy, they sure do want a lot of money for them. Like over $1,000 US for an adjuster. Like that's motivation enough if you're Canadian. Like there's no way we're going to take the gross domestic product of Canada and send it to the United States for one round adjuster. So we're going to have to get a little innovative and make our own. All right, so here's the screw part. This is a 1-inch course, so 1-inch 8 threads per inch bar, and again, no lathe, so I need a flat or something on the far end of this to put the handle on. So I'm just going to TIG it in. I put 4 tacks in and a little bit of shim stock, which I believe was a beer can, in order to get that thing shimmed up. I think there was 3 passes to weld this out to, and then I just ground it, just wandered it over to the grinder and got that got the weld bead knocked off, and we're happy there. That'll work to screw that adjuster up and down. I'm just testing it to see whether or not it's going to be nice and straight. It wasn't perfect, so it ran it over to the press and give it a little poke before I put the last pass on. So at this point, we're hoping everything turns out all right. Pretty sure the bar didn't come out of the factory that straight. About 2 thou. That's fine. Wow, that was just butter. The new blade on the saw works so nicely. All right, now for this part, I'm making the mount, so how the big tube is going to join into the main frame. So I just needed that one piece on the frame cut. More information in the upcoming video on how I'm going to go about attacking the frame. But in the meantime, I just need a 2 3/8 plate, so that's 10 mil plate. I'm going to use that as the sides, as you can see there, me just fitting it into the offcut there off that frame part. So just need a little bit of that so I can get the fitment right for this entire project. It's awfully cold in the garage these days, but out comes a little bit of dye, and we're going to mark off where all of these holes are going to go. There's a lot of holes being drilled in this particular project to get it done, but it's never really a problem. When you're working with tube, by the way, or anything that has a big radius corner, that's where that dividing head comes in super handy. And off to the drill press. Again, using the stubby drills. Everyone uses sort of jobber length drills. I mean, if you don't know that stubby length drills exist, buy better drills. So they work great. And then I go over to the step drill, and I can't get all the way through the wall thickness, but I will come back and just finish it off. But those unibit drills, they just drill a nice round hole in thin materials, where a regular drill doesn't drill a round hole in these materials. Off goes the weld line on the inside, and now we're ready to get everything fitted in. Okay, one of the problems that we have when we're working with tube is it's not going to be flat. It's sort of hard to pick up with the ruler here, but the way the tube is made, it's forced through a die, and it used to be round, right? You've got the weld here on the top side. I've carefully ground that weld out. You can see that it's straight enough for a tube, but it's not going to be very good when we're trying to bolt things into it. So if we try to take a distance where we're going to set our 2 plates apart, we don't want to set it that distance to where the tube is widest, or you'll never get this piece pushed into the tube. So you have to pick somewhere that's going to be parallel. So to do this, I'm going to take my 2 plates, just trying to get the distance between these 2 parts. I'm going to set them in. The plates have been cut, right, to get away from the radiuses here in the corners. So they're sitting nice and flat against that bottom. Now I want to measure from here, from the top of the plates two, and I'm going to use these corner areas right over here. So right here and right here, you can even see that there's a track on the top of that tube right there, and that's where that roller was. So this is parallel and the correct size, and then in here it dips down and then up again to the weld, and then down and then up again to this corner. So I want this measurement here and I want that measurement there, because the rest of this in between is going to be, well, it's going to be a bit of a mess. So to do this, I'm going to use a parallel, but it's an adjustable parallel. They're reasonably wide. They're 6 mil wide, 1/4 inch wide, and they're cheap. Okay, so they don't actually come to you good. You're going to have to tune these a little bit to get them nice, but I've never known anyone to buy these that didn't actually want to tune them. We just set that into the tube, and I sort of run it to where the back of the plate is, and then I'm just sneaking the other side up to it. And then you find out, well, if I had a piece that was running parallel, that would be a good measurement for it. Right there. All right, so we take that out. First, we tighten up the set screw. And the screws will come to you half chowdered right out of the box. I think these are made in India. Thanks, India. So just carefully tighten those screws. We test it on the other side to make sure that's going to be a good measurement. It's even loose on this other side. So I may want to tighten this up a little bit. And then you'll see through the holes, actually a little tight. Can't make it all the way in. Through the middle, tons of room. Holes again, little tight. So it's dipping down here through the centers of the tube where I put the holes. So I'm going to change this measurement up just a hair. Now, in case you think this is taking a long time, it isn't, not really. I'm trying to do this in real time just to show you how little time it takes. Versus trying to, like, if you try to take a ruler and measure this, it's going to be wrong. You could use calipers, I guess, to do it, but this is a direct reading method. Always has worked well for me. It's very, very fast. Now you're going to be in tapping distance on this side. And on this side, at least you're not going to be all over the map. Now we're just going to use this measurement to create the spacer. I've just got some scrap material here. So I'm just going to create a spacer for these two plates to hold them apart. Right? And that's going to be the measurement that we're going to use to do it. Did I mention it was cold in the garage? That's a little torch coming out there just to warm that up so I can get it marked. One of the other advantages of using that adjustable parallel is you just direct mark right onto the material. There it is. Perfect. Dead nuts right off the saw. Yeah, that's your time saver right there, is you know it's right the minute you do it. If the parallel fit, then the part you cut's going to fit. Split it in half. Not rocket science here. Bolt it up, set it in place. Gee, what do you know? It worked as it should. Then just get the squirt gun out and nail it down. Flipped it over, got it all tacked in place, and pull it out, weld it up on the inside. I didn't see the need for a great big weld going across the entirety of it, so I didn't. I just spotted it in. It's not going anywhere. All right, so now I'm just getting that hole spotted in, and I'm going to drill and tap it for the ball detent so that I can rotate that whole thing 90 degrees and have it stop. Okay, so you can see we've cleaned the plating off of the nuts in the area that we're just going to tack these in. Just because don't weld plating. That's a bad idea. So I've cleaned up both the nuts that I'm going to weld here, and then I've covered the threads with some spatter block just to make sure there's no future problems there. And then I've got all the other parts that are still on it up here, so just cover them off. It takes just find some stuff to cover it. The reason we're using two nuts is as follows. Any single nut on these threads, there's going to be a certain amount of play. There's not much. This is a pretty decent threaded rod, but there's just a little bit of play back and forth. So in order to make these a zero clearance nut, in essence, we just put both nuts on, thread it in a little bit on the shaft, and then we don't want to lock them hard. We just want to lock it enough to take up the thread between the two nuts. So I want to make sure we can still move it easily, but that we're going to have less backlash between the nuts. It's just the poor man's way of making an anti-backlash nut. So we'll do that before we go and tack these onto the plates that we just made. All right, let's get it done. Yeah, whoops. I got that a little tight. And it's also going to pull, right? So that as you tack it, it's going to actually pull that nut over to you a little bit. So it'll, and then anyway, I got it working on the second try, so that's fine. There's zero backlash on this particular setup. And just tying it all down and trying to make it as square as I can so that, you know, everything is centered and this is all going to line up in the middle of the tube. And it just, get it tacked in. There's not too much to this. The fun part's coming though. And I did just use a feeler gauge to make sure I'm dead center on that tube. Yeah, I'm that kind of anal. And then making use of some of the clamps and things I built in an earlier video to get this all set in place. And that is absolutely dead nuts, as close as I can get it in the center of that tube. So it's pretty good. And then I'm sort of watching myself make a mistake that I'll explain later, but as I'm watching the video, it's always fun to go, oh, yeah, exactly right there. I just made that mistake. It's interesting. Try to wrap your corners, folks. It's mostly gentlemen that are watching the channel, so we could do a little AVE. Gentlemen, here, watch your corners. So as you're going around, don't stop or start your TIG welds or any welds at the corners. Try to wrap the corners. I'm not great at it. I don't do this for a living anymore. But I know enough that I'm supposed to go around the corner, right? It's hard to do. It's not easy. But the more you do it, the better you get. I'm just practicing a little weave there every time. Even I'm going to grind all this weld off, but it doesn't matter. Every time you strike your torch, you got to be practicing technique, right? So every weld, it always matters. I'm just going to grind it all off. It doesn't actually matter how it looked, but I did get a little practice putting a weave in. I haven't done a weave in years, so that was kind of fun. So now that I know what the inside and outside dimensions are, I can machine up some plastic strips. So I just milled those to get them to the right width. And then I was only short by about 10 thou. So some 10 thou shim stock, over to the cutter we go, and we lop off what we need. I need 2 strips in the end, so it wasn't perfect, but I got a plan. Now I'm going to tack that W hub in. I actually put 8 tacks in it. I guess I'm that kind of anal. 8 tacks. So to get the 8 tacks in, so those plastic strips and everything is on the inside when I do it. Then I take it all apart and I pull that entire assembly off at the top and then weld it up, right? I don't want to weld it up with the plastic in there and melt the plastic, right? And after that's done, holy, that's hot. Then I have a bushing that fits perfectly. It's 1 inch ID and it was 1.25 OD, and that's what it needed to be to go right in the hole. And it's a little bit proud of the hub, which I need because I didn't want any of the bearings and other things to be always just running against the steel. So there's a little bit of the brass or bronze bushing on either side of that. So that makes it just nice. All right, so that final shaft got it trimmed up. So we've got a thrust bearing, right? And the flats I just put in with the grinder, so nothing fancy there. And then you just mark it initially with the stop, then take it over, grind it, and away you go. And now we get the final machining phase, which is just to find the center of that shaft, right? Listen to my dog bark. Drill the holes, and then I bought a keyed shaft that fits my hand wheel. And all of that, the hand wheel, the keyed shaft, as well as that 1 inch threaded rod, all came from McMaster Car. But they don't pay me or give me a discount or anything. They don't even want to sell to me. So I'm not listing the product numbers and the whatever. You go figure it out. Anyway, key stock goes in. Again with the TIG, we're just going to tack it a couple places and then just light it up. And then we're pretty much off to the races, folks. Okay, so at this point, it's time to put it all together. You may have noticed that the quill got about 3 inches shorter. So it was a little bit too long. I got to admit it. We got to keep the channel clean, folks. I meant to cut this down and I didn't. I got excited. I welded it on. So I had to cut it off and weld it back on again. Again, no big deal. You can't even see where the weld is. I'm happy with that. And it's not going to matter. But now that we've got... So I've welded the inside. I stick welded that. I didn't have to stick weld it. I've done a lot of stick welding. I kind of like stick welding. It's fun, it's easy, it's cheap. And the results are structural. So I'm able to get the rod down into the hole, weld the backside up, just for those people that figure that this is going to break right off. She's going nowhere. It's the shaft, right, that we made over here, right? It's not machinist perfectly centered, but it's perfectly centered good enough for this. So as close as I can get that to the middle is where that is. So I'm happy with that. So now we're going to get going and put it all together for what is the first time. I've never had this thing fully together yet. So it loads from the bottom side. You're going to load it towards the top. At this point, I only need 2 shims. We've determined that, so just 20 thou. So 10 thou per side is all that was required to get this to work. And I suspect that once it's all powder coated and finished up, that I may not need those at all, because it's super tight. And that's exactly what you want when you're making a machine like this. You do not want it to be sloppy. Okay, so I'm firing those pieces of UMHW in. Just going to work these over into the middle so that the shims are centered. And then they do stay put. Okay, so just trying to get the shims equal on the sides. And then we should be butter. Okay, but you can see how tight that is. So it's not at all loose. Assembly of the next part involves the shaft, flats cut on the shaft. Just to check to make sure and where it's supposed to go. Okay, so the collar goes on. Bearing goes on, top goes on, other collar goes on. And now we're good. And now we get the last piece of adjustment. So as we screw this in, we need to make sure the top plate is centering nicely here, because it's not perfect. Again, not made on a lathe, so there's little inaccuracies everywhere. And we just account for those the best that we can. Just tight right there. And when it goes that way, it wants to go that way. Get it to the tight spot, look which way it's trying to pull, and then tighten it up there and it should be fine. Can't wait to put some polish on this thing. That's fine. Good. That's not bad. Okay, so it was a fair bit of work to get this piece done. I am very pleased with how it's all worked out. Again, we've got the ultra high molecular weight plastic slides on the inside with a little bit of steel shim stock, and that's taking the place of all the adjusters and outside stuff that I've seen on other people's design. I wanted the quill, so this part, to be as big as possible and as rigid as I could make it, for no other reason than I figure that's probably got to work best. And then I didn't like all the different ways that people were attaching this part to the tube. You can repurpose those frames. So you can take that same frame and you could add an air hammer to it and you could turn it into a planishing hammer. If you get a really big air hammer, you can almost turn it into a Pullmax, but I don't think we're going that far. But anyway, again, nice, smooth operation. Feels really good. I didn't have to machine a single thing. I just built it with welded parts. Okay, so we're going to be working on the frame. So you've seen me do a little bit of the cleanup on the frame, and I've cut the parts, but I haven't welded any of it yet. I haven't explained all that. I still have to build all the pieces to hold all this stuff, and I got to get it all put together. So if you're interested and this has been fun, I'm going to put this down now. And I have to figure out how to attach it to my welding bench. So we're still a ways back. We're at least one more episode, and then we should be getting back onto car stuff anytime soon, but I will have one essential tool that I think I need in order to finish this project. There's lots of reasons why, and we'll show you that in upcoming episodes. So thank you very much for staying with me all the way to the end. I do appreciate it. Don't forget, like, subscribe. As Superfast Matt always says, all hail the algorithm, right? It's all about getting that algorithm driven up. There's stuff in the merch store. There's shirts in the merch store. I'm just releasing toques again, which a lot of people in the world call beanies, but Canadians call them toques. I got a maple leaf right in the front. People know where to throw the snowballs. Anyway, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next episode. Keep your stick on the ice. And my wife is super happy that this stuff's now out of the spare bedroom.